I'm Gregorio Pellegrino. I work for Fondazione LIA. Fondazione LIA is a non-profit organization that has been created by the Italian Publisher Association together with the Italian Blind Union. So it has been created both from content creators and from end users. And we work with publishers to create born accessible content and to distribute this content to the end user. So we promote reading, accessible reading. We try to spread a culture of accessibility, and we deliver training for end users, but also for publishers and other organizations that are interested in accessibility. We are part of an international network because we are in the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, that is the consortium that defines the standards for digital publishing. So, for example, EPUB, web publications, that will be the next standard for digital books, and along with HTML and CSS that are the standards for creating websites. Then we are part of the EDR Lab, that is a French organization that develops reading tools for ebooks. And we are part of the DESI Consortium, that is a consortium of different organizations that works in the field of accessibility for the content. So with this international network, we have a wide view on the standards that are available, on the state of the art of digital accessibility, and also on the future of both standards and accessibility. So I'm a computer engineer, but my parents founded a publishing house in 1995. So I grew up working both with InDesign, PageMaker before InDesign, and studying computer engineering. So I mash up the two things. And now I'm the Chief Accessibility Officer for the foundation. I want to ask you something about you so I can understand better who you are and what's your business. Okay. Okay. Oh.
I founded a readers social network
Okay.
for Spanish-speaking community.
Okay.
We have 200,000 subscribers.
Wow. So where readers can share their readings.
Now they can buy ebooks.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Amelia.
Okay. Okay.
I'm
From
Peru.
Peru.
And I have a publisher of visual books.
Okay. Okay. Yeah? Okay. Digital distributor. And what's your name, sorry? Etienne. And are you based here or in Canada? In Quebec. Okay. Okay. And you have also a partner in Italy that is Digita. Yeah.
My name is Patricia.
Okay.
I work as a freelance consultant in the digital sector.
Okay.
Working with Bogotá. And I'm located in Madrid, Spain.
Okay. 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 The name of the company is Packetbook. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
And the company is published
Okay.
with the national media of the Spanish book market.
Okay, good. So, I will give you a brief introduction on the new legislative framework about accessibility, and then we will try to work together on how to manage accessibility in the supply chain, in the digital publishing supply chain. One thing is that this workshop has been made thanks to Aldus, that is the network of European book fairs, that is a project co-founded by the European Union. If you want to know more about Aldus, there is the website that is aldusnet.eu, where there is also a knowledge hub and like a social network for connecting professionals in the publishing fields. Okay, so first of all, in the 2016, the Marrakesh Treaty has been approved by WIPO, that is the World Intellectual Property Organization that is based in Geneva, in Switzerland. Do you know something about the Marrakesh Treaty? It is really, really important for accessibility, and it provides an exception to the copyright law for end users and for authorized entities. And what does it mean? It means that end users, so blind users, visually impaired, or dyslexics, can convert a text in an accessible format, so from a non-accessible format to an accessible format. So, for example, scanning the text, or also taking an EPUB and transforming in an accessible EPUB without having to ask the permission to the publisher or to the copyright holder. So they can do that freely. That is not a problem, since they do for their own. But the other thing is that authorized entities, which means usually libraries for the blind, can share and distribute the content made accessible, including cross-border distribution. So, for example, if the library for the blind in Spain is creating some accessible content in Spanish, they can send this content to Argentina or to Peru without having to ask anything. So this could be quite an issue for publishers, because it impacts on the market, since when authorized entities create an accessible version, then it will distribute it for free and cross-border. But in some national laws, for example, in Italy, I'm not sure the other laws around the world, there is a clause that say that the extension of the copyright does not apply if an accessible version of the text is already available on the market. So if the publisher creates an accessible version and puts it in the market, then end users and authorized entities cannot create another version and distribute for free. So the end users have to buy it. And this is one important law that is worldwide. Another important law that is for the European markets is the European Directive on the Accessibility Requirements for Products and Services, also called European Accessibility Act. It's really similar to the law that that is available in the States, that is the Section 508, that says that products and services placed on the market have to be accessible. So it has been approved in the European Parliament in March, so 2 months ago. And in the next 3 years, the different states, members of the UE, have to transpose in the national law. And after 6 years, all the products and services, new products and services, have to be accessible by default. So only micro enterprises with less than 10 employees or less than 2 million euros in turnover can be excluded. So from the medium publishers and above, they are all obligated to create accessible content. Who are the beneficiaries? The beneficiaries of the European Accessibility Act are more than under the Marrakesh Treaty, because they are persons with permanent or temporary physical, mental, intellectual, and sensory disabilities. What do we mean with permanent or temporary? This is a slide from Microsoft, and as you can see, for the C, we have a permanent, a blind person, temporary, a person with cataract, and situational, we have a distracted driver that cannot see a screen. So we have to create content accessible both for permanent or temporary disabilities. But the European Accessibility Act doesn't it is not only for content creators, so for publishers, but it asks that the whole supply chain is accessible, because if the publishers create inaccessible ebooks, but then the end user cannot buy it, it's like the ebook doesn't exist. And also, the directive also will apply to foreign products that will be imported in Europe. And for ebooks, we don't import ebooks, because they are not physical products. But since we sell foreign ebooks in the European countries, then we will be under the directive. So they have to be accessible. So for example, the ebooks distributed from the mark or your products. And this will be really a big change for accessibility. The directive says that only new books and services will be affected. So not the old books, not the catalog, but only new books creating from the 6th year after the adoption. Okay, so this could be a big problem, but it also can be an opportunity to change the workflows, the business model, the way we create ebooks, and the way we design ebooks. And our idea, the idea of Fondazione Lia, the work we are doing in Italy since 2011, is to create born accessible ebooks. What does it mean? The idea is to design ebooks for all, and so work with accessible ebooks with constituent elements, I mean semantic tags and semantic elements for describing the different part of the ebooks, describe the structure of the ebooks in a standard format. Standards are really, really important. And create ebooks that are compatible with assistive technologies that are the technologies used by end users, both blind and visually impaired. There is an exception for comics and art books, and picture books that are books that are fully visual and will be really, really difficult to create an alternative way for getting that content for blind people. So this type of books are not compiling to be accessible. Yeah, that's all. So the way we work, the way I propose you to work, is to design for all and create born accessible publications. So from really the beginning of the development of a new publication. What does it mean? It means that born accessible publications are e-books created with a specific procedure that creates accessibility checks, internal and external. I mean, internal of the publishing house or external to the publishing house. And to use international standards, both for creating the publication, which means essentially PDFs or EPUBs are the two standards available right now for creating accessible publication, but also to use international standards for describing the accessibility of the publication. So international standards for metadata, and also in this case we have two standards for describing the accessibility of a publication. One is Onyx, I think many of you knows Onyx, and the other is schema.org, that is a standard used by search engines for understanding the web pages. And then distribute both the file, so the born accessible file, and the metadata to the value chain, providing the end user with the description of the accessibility feature. So the idea is not to create a separate market, but to use the main market, the mass market, and to use the mass ebook stores like Apple, Google, Kobo, for instance, Amazon, for distributing and selling accessible content. So we don't want to create another access that is on the other side, but we want only one access, one store, one way for everyone to get the same content. Because the idea is that blind and print impaired people will be in the same conditions as sight readers, so they will have the same titles with the same format at the same time, using the same distributor channels with the same information, so the same metadata and the same reading instruments. So we don't want to create another market, another way, another distribution. That is the aim of the European, but also of the Marrakesh Treaty. So the idea is to create content for everyone from the beginning. So we encourage publishers to produce accessible versions with the same production processes as traditional digital content, I mean ebooks, with the same metadata standards and the same distribution of the traditional content. Because in the traditional way, so right now, for creating different versions of printed books for accessibility, we have different processes. So for creating a Braille version, we have to transform the text in Braille and then print out the Braille. For creating an enlarged character version, we have to enlarge the character and print it. For creating an audiobook, we need a speaker, we need to record the speaker and to distribute it. Instead, using the digital formats, so for example, EPUB, with creating only one file that is the same that we distribute for everyone, the user can choose which way used for assessing the content. So it's the user that can decide if he wanted to use a braille display to read it. Braille display are like tablets that via Bluetooth can be connected to the device for reading, or he can decide to enlarge the characters using the different features of the reading solutions, or to use the text-to-speech for getting an audio version of the book. So different processes, only one process that can serve all the users. And these are the opportunities for a content producer. So if a digital publication is accessible, it is better for everyone, because more accessibility means more quality for everyone. One important thing for publications that are not private or are not sold is that if a content is accessible, the search engine optimization of the content is higher, because if you can understand, for example, the Google crawlers acts on websites like blind people, because the crawler is a robot that goes on the website and it doesn't see anything. So a crawler is like a blind user navigating the website. So having accessible content means better content for everyone. Okay, so let's start with discussing the different things, because we saw that the new laws will ask the whole supply chain to be accessible, and we understood that accessible content is better for everyone, that we have some standards that we can use, but now the problem is having all the supply chain connected, so to make it work. So, for example, starting this way, we have content creators. Okay. I mean, for example, publishers. And here we have users. Okay. Which are the different actors in the supply chain, I mean, in the digital supply chain for getting from content creators to users? Some suggestions? One is a distributor. Yeah? The other?
Content creators include publishers?
I mean publishers, yes. Yeah? Okay. Bookshops. You mean digital bookshops? Yeah, so like retailers. Okay. Then, for example, if the retailers sell the file, then you need a reading solution for reading it. Okay. Then the reading solution normally, it can be both a standalone device, like an e-reader, or can be an app installed on a device. So we have somewhere here a device. Okay. And then usually we have the end user. Okay. So, what the content creators have to create an accessible content. So have to create an accessible file following some guidelines after we will see the different guidelines. And then we'll send the file to the different part of the supply chain. One thing is that the European accessibility law require to the different actors of the chain to sell only accessible content. So a distributor, if it gets a non-accessible content, should remove it from the market. So stop to distribute and selling it. The same is for retailers. If a non-accessible content is sent to the retailer can stop to sell it to end user. The other thing is that normally users goes to retailers for finding their books, but right now they cannot understand which books are accessible and which are not. So another important thing, along with the file, are the metadata, describing accessibility. And they are really, really important for ebooks, since the law will ask all importers and all content producers to have accessibility information on the packaging of the products for physical products. But for digital products, we don't have packaging. So the only way for giving the information of accessibility to the end user is with metadata. Metadata are data that goes with the file, but are outside the file, and they describe the file. Normally, metadata, we have two types of metadata. One are bibliographic metadata, so title, subtitle, cover, the authors, and so on. And other are commercial metadata, so for example, the price, the availability, and other things. But now we need a new type of metadata that are the metadata on accessibility that have to be sent to the retailers. Okay, so we have content creators that create both accessible files and accessible metadata, and they send them to the distributor that have to check if the file is really accessible or not for deciding if you want to distribute it or not. And then the distributor will send both the file and the metadata to the retailers. Here with retailers, we have we can have two types of retailers in the digital publishing supply chain. One are bookstores, but the other one are e-libraries for ebook lending. So both bookstores and libraries should implement and display accessible metadata, but this is the simple thing. The other thing is that they have to create an accessible user interface. So they have to modify their interfaces for having a full accessible interface. Full accessible means that the user can navigate through the user interface, find the preferred book, put it in the cart, and then buy it without any problems. When we started with LIA in Italy, we found that, for example, for the credit card forms were not accessible since there was a sentence saying that the red fields were mandatory, but blind people cannot see red on the page, and so no blind people will never be able to use that kind of form. So the other thing for retailers, and with retailers I mean bookstore and library, that is really, really important is the UI that has to be accessible. Then, if the user can get the right information on the books and can buy it, he can download the ebook and try to start reading it through a reading solution. Here, the problem with reading solutions is that normally reading solutions are not accessible by assistive technologies. I mean, speech synthesis and other things. For example, the different technologies that are used by blind people. So one problem with reading solutions is the UI. In the reading solutions, there are different buttons. Maybe usually there is one button for adding a new book, another button for reading the book, another button for adding a bookmark. But if the different buttons are not described with a textual label, then the user doesn't get anything, and all the buttons look the same, and so he cannot add books, read books, and do anything with the reading solutions. So the reading solutions have to develop and implement a user interface that is fully accessible. And then with the devices, the same problem. The devices should allow people to use assistive technologies, so to have the right technical solutions for having assistive technologies. For example, normally e-readers are not accessible, since in the e-readers there are no speakers, so you cannot have speech synthesis. And so for blind people, they are not used. I mean, Amazon in the States have got big problems with the procurement, since the national procurement in the States requires that every new device has to be accessible, full accessible. So they tried to sell the Kindles to universities, and they got problems with the accessibility things. So they created a dongle that is a strange product that you can plug in the Kindle to have an audio version of the ebooks on the Kindle, but it is not really used. So the whole ecosystem, the whole supply chain have to be fully accessible. And this is where we are now. For example, in Italy, we have fixed this part, so the ebooks and the metadata are accessible, but then we have problems with the other parts, since they are not part of, I mean, they don't know what they have to do for being compliant with the law, for being compliant with accessibility. What does it mean for publishers to be accessible? Let me check. Okay, so. Okay. From a publisher point of view, there is a process for creating accessible content. So starting from the production of an ebook, as the output of the production, we get an EPUB file, usually. Then we have some automatic tools for checking and validate the EPUB file. The first tool is the EPUB check. Maybe some of you use the EPUB check. The EPUB check is an automatic tool for testing EPUBs and conformance to the standard. And the other tool is ACE. ACE is an open source tool developed by the DAISY consortium that checks the EPUB against the EPUB accessibility 1.0 guidelines that are international guidelines for the accessibility of the EPUBs. So when you get the EPUB, you can pass the EPUB through two different checks. If one of these two checks gives you an error, then you have a problem with your file, you have a problem with accessibility, and you cannot say that this file is accessible. But then the automatic testing is not enough, so you have to check the file with a human check for accessibility, like a QA, quality assurance of the file. And this can be done using an accessibility checklist. An accessibility checklist is a checklist of different things that have to be checked by a human controller for be sure that the content is fully accessible. In Fondazione LIA, we developed one accessibility checklist that is made of 42 different checks that we run on every file. So there is an operator that gets the file and checks against these 42 checks. Then from the output of the accessibility checklist, we can create the metadata. And the metadata, for the metadata, there are two standards. But how does it work that we create the accessibility from the checklist? The checklist is made of different checks. For example, one check is about the tables. So are tables accessible? Another check is the table of contents interactive? So from these checks, if they get yes or no, we can create metadata saying that the tables inside the file are accessible. So directly from the checks, we create the metadata. This way, yes, no, we create metadata. So the metadata describing the accessibility features of the content are creating directly from the checks you made by the controller. And they are creating in two different standards. One is the Onyx standard, and the other standard is schema.org. Then what happened is that both the metadata and the file are sent to the distributor. And the distributor will disseminate it through the different channels. So one thing is that maybe in the publishing house there are no expertises about accessibility, or the publishing house is not sure of the quality of their content. So one good way for managing it is to have a third-party authority that certifies the accessibility of the content. For example, in Italy, Fondazione LIA is a third-party authority that works with publishers for certifying the accessibility. So we are not in the publishing house, we are outside, we get the files, we check the files, and certify them for end users. The important thing is that the automatic accessibility testing is not enough. We always need an accessibility check by human, because the accessibility checker cannot understand, for example, if a table of content is interactive or not, since it cannot understand which part of the text is a table of contents. So there are some checks that cannot be made by automatic testing. The other tests that cannot be made by automatic testings are, for example, the test on the alternative description of images. Since a content producer can put anything in an alternative description, then we need a human check for control that the content of the image and the alternative descriptions are the same. Okay. Then, when the distributor gets both the file and the metadata, the distributor will send it to online bookstores and books in print catalog. I don't know in the different countries if there are books in print catalog for ebooks. In Italy, we have the books in print catalog managed by Informazioni Editoriali, that is the manager of the books in print catalog for paper books, that has also a books in print catalog for ebooks. I don't know in Canada or in Quebec if there is a books in print catalog. No. So there is not a centralized catalog where all the ebooks, the information of ebooks goes. No. Yeah, in fact, is one problem with the big retailers, for example, Kobo, Google, and Apple. They don't understand the way books in print catalog works. For example, in Italy, I know that in Germany there is, and also in France, I think. So they are centralized catalogs. Okay, and on the other way, the ONIX and the EPUB, so metadata and file, goes to the online bookstore where it is managed. It goes, I think, in a database or something like that, and it is presented in the front end. In the front end, the information of accessibility can be presented to end user, but also to search engine crawlers using some codes in this format that is schema.org that helps the search engine crawlers to better understand that the content is accessible, so to present it in a proper way to end users. Okay. Do you have some questions since here on the accessibility workflow, the laws and the different things? I think it would be, I mean, for the publishing industry, it will be really a big change since now, usually a publisher creates an EPUB, put it in the market, and it doesn't care anything. But with the new laws, publisher will have to check the accessibility and to create the metadata. That is really one important thing, and to distribute it correctly to end user. And this will change different things in the accessibility fields. Okay. We can have different problems in our supply chain. One big problem is with DRM. DRM is a technology for managing the distribution of the files for piracy and illegal copies of the files. and usually DRMs block accessibility. For example, the Adobe DRM, that is the most used DRM right now in the market, blocks accessibility. So if you create unaccessible content and distribute it with the Adobe DRM, it is completely non-accessible to end users. But there are other DRMs that are coming that are fully accessible. So, for example, one is the LCP DRM, that is a DRM developed by the Iridium Foundation and the EDR Lab that is this office in France that developed this new DRM that is implemented in the DMARC platform. And this new type of DRM allow end user to get protected, fully accessible content. And the other problems are, for example, with content creators when they use the same ISBN and the same unique code for different file formats, because different file formats can have different levels of accessibility. So if they use the same ISBN, then they get problems. For example, the Amazon format is far less accessible from the EPUB format. So if you give to the end user information on the accessibility of a content in EPUB, it will be really different from the accessibility of the content in the MOBI format or in the Amazon format. Then, from a digital distributor point of view, it can be a problem overriding accessibility information. So if you get different information from different sources, there can be some problems of overriding them. And then, as a bookstore, as an online bookstore, you can have problems with if you don't manage accessible metadata, or if the database is not ready for managing this kind of metadata, but also if the purchasing process is not accessible or the user interface is not accessible. And then, for reading solution, it is really important to show accessibility metadata to end user. The metadata can be both in the Onyx feed or inside the file, and to have an accessible user interface for the end users. Okay. This is how we work in Italy. So when a publisher creates a new publication, the publisher put it in the distributor platform, and the distributor platform automatically sends the new books to the VCC, that is the backend we use for managing all the accessible files. So we receive some new files, and we do 2 automatic tests. One is the EPUB check, as I mentioned before, and the other is with ACE. And then we have the LIA operator. It is a colleague of mine that manually checks the files against a checklist. As an output to the checklist, the file can be accessible or not. So if the file is not accessible, we send the information on how to fix accessibility to the publisher, so the publisher can modify the file and resend it to us. Instead, if the file is accessible, we create the metadata. We put a label that is the LIA label, saying that the file is fully accessible and it has a quality control made by LIA. and we send this information to the books in print catalog. And we also manage a bookshelf where blind users can find all the accessible ebooks that are available. We have more than 20,000 accessible ebooks right now in Italy. We cover about the 80% of the market of new books each year, which means 100 and 100 new titles per month that we check. From a bookstore or from a retailer point of view, we have some partnerships with different retailers in Italy. One is Media Library Online, that is a technology provider for libraries. So it is a platform where a user can lend accessible ebooks. And in their interface, you can filter for accessible ebooks using this filter. If you filter with them, you get the different you get only the ebooks that are accessible. Then if you click on an ebook, you get the LIA label in the description of the file. And if you click on the LIA label, you get the information of accessibility with the different accessibility features. So in this way, the user can have the right idea on which content is accessible and for the content which are the accessibility features of that particular content. That is one of the best implementation of this solution we have found around. Okay, so yeah, I have some information on metadata standards, but maybe they are a little bit technical, so I don't know if you are interested in these things. I mean, what do you think about the change of accessibility for your business? For example, you produce reading solution. Will it affect?
But the question is about the text-to-speech and ensuring that the text-to-speech are available in all languages.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have to implement the text-to-speech in your reading solution, because the text-to-speech is on the device. So in the device, the user can activate the accessibility features. For example, in iPhone and in Android, both you have VoiceOver or Talkback, that are two technologies that can read anything in the screen. So the only thing that you have is to create the application accessible. Right. So creating the application accessible means that for every button, you have to add a textual label, and also that every button can be accessed using the assistive technology. So you can try with your device to activate the accessibility feature of the talkback and try to navigate through the application to understand if it works or not. So one thing is that, and the other is to display the accessibility information that are inside the file. So inside an EPUB file, you can put some accessibility information, and you should display them to the end user. And do you implement DRMs? So for example, the Adobe DRM or? Okay, so if. Okay, so if you are part of SAP, that will be fine. But you don't use Readium for. Readium is
Yes, we use for our programs in France.
okay.
We use this Readmagine, but also our own solution because they have a little bit different from French.
Okay. 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 And from a distributor point of view, what do you think about these new laws on accessibility?
Makes sense. I'm not too on the technical
Okay.
field, but I will check, when we
Okay.
back in the office, because currently through Digita, the metadatas are.
Yeah, right now, no, because in Italy we don't send the metadata to a Digita, so to the distributor, but we send it to the e-books in print catalog.
Okay.
But yeah, we are trying to understand how to send it directly to a Digita or the distributor, so they can send it to Kobo, because, for example, Kobo is starting asking for this kind of metadata for displaying the information to the end user, and also I know that Apple is moving, and Kobo and Google the same, so they will start asking for this kind of metadata that can be presented in Onyx. So it is something.
I'm not sure if any of our publishers I'm talking about, the ones in Canada,
Okay, I don't know.
are using that, or because it might be a requirement for them to sell outside
Yeah,
of Canada currently.
right now no, but it will be a requirement. Another thing that is important for distributors is that you are responsible for the accessibility of the content. So you should check the accessibility of the content before distributing the content. So you can ask the publisher for a certification of their content, or you can implement a checker or something like that for checking the level of the accessibility. But then you have also to manage the feedback for end users. So what happens if an end user buys an ebook that has been told to be fully accessible, and then it is not accessible? It will ask the bookstore for removing it, and the bookstore will ask you for removing it from the distribution. So you have to manage both the metadata and the feedback from the end users, because it will be part of your responsible here at this level. Do you have?
As retailers, I guess that we have to do our part, but just like we will depend a lot on distributors that will transfer the responsibility. We buy books from different, so.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. One problem for you, I mean, one thing you have to check if the user interface is accessible, and not only the user interface, but the whole process. So from understanding which book, yeah, and also the downloading process. So the whole process has to be fully accessible, following the guidelines. The guidelines for creating accessible user interfaces are the WCAG. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. So with the WCAG, they are both for web content but also for publications, and these are guidelines that describe how to create accessible user interfaces. So you can follow these guidelines. And from these guidelines, we have the EPUB accessibility 1.0 that are the guidelines for creating accessible EPUBs that are based on the WCAG. So you can ask your developer or your supplier to follow these guidelines. Also, the Mark has also a front-end store for publishers, right? So for, yeah, I spoke with Francesca about that, because you should follow the guidelines as well, and also you should display accessibility metadata on that store for the end user. Yeah. I mean, different publishing is not only for the publishing sector. We are working right now a lot with banks and with government institutions, and they are starting to create all their content in an accessible format. So we have worked with the European Publishing Office, the Publishing Office of the United States, the Bank of Italy, that is the umbrella bank for the Italian banks, and with other big banks in Italy, and they are starting to create all their content in an accessible way. So this is something that is coming and coming and coming. Yeah, maybe I can show you, let me see if the other, how it works for end users, or maybe I can show you it here, so you can better understand. Let me see. Or I can show you. It would be nice to have it on the big screen, but I don't know if I will be able to do that. So, if you go in the settings of your device, you should find nuova registrazione schermo. No. You should find a setting called accessibility, and okay, I switch. Okay. So, sorry, my telephone is in Italian, but inside the settings, inside general settings, you have accessibility, and here you can activate the assistive technology that is called VoiceOver. On Android, it is called TalkBack, but it is the same, and this is a screen reader. Let me see if it works. Okay. Okay. You should listen something. Okay.
Punto elenco tocca 2. Punto elenco usa 3 dita per scorrere.
Okay. As you can see, the telephone the mobile phone start to work differently. So with one touch, I can move up and down in the screen, and when I focus on an element, it reads that element. So, for example, in the okay. Okay. If I wanted to open this app, I have to tap, double tap on the screen. In every place of the screen is fine.
Calendario. Intestazione. Mercoledì. Lem Spaces con Maurizio. Dalle 10. Psicologa break. Dalle 15. Viaggio Torino Porta Susa Milano. Calendario.
Okay, so everything works this way. Then we have, let me show you, the possibility of use this technology that is called rotator. Yeah, that helps you with the accessibility feature. And one possibility is to use the input in Braille, so people can write in Braille on the screen using these 6 dots that are the 6 dots of the Braille. So I cannot write in Braille. And all this part of the technology is built in the system, so you don't have to develop anything for this. You only have to follow the guidelines. So for making it accessible to end users.
Meteo. No. Salute. Cartella libri. 2. Apro la cartella libri. 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 Letture. Intestazione. Letture. Intestazione.
Okay.
Libreria. Pannello. Libreria. Intestazione. La madre della madre di sua madre e le sue. La madre della madre di
Apple Books is quite accessible, not fully accessible, but quite accessible. As you can see, or listen, if you understand Italian, everything is correctly tagged, so when I'm on a button, I listen. Pulsante means button, so for every element of the UI, I get both the content and the semantic information on the content. Okay. This is the table of contents. Oh. I'm not used to. Okay. Okay. And then I can decide how to move in the text. I can move row by. Let me see. Okay, I can move row by row. Oh. It is quite. And it changed pages when you reach the end. As you can listen, it is not an audiobook. There is no speaker. It is everything is made by the assistive technology, and the developer doesn't have to do anything for having this solution. It is only a matter of using the right APIs, the right guidelines. And this is for blind people. But then we have another technology, okay, for low vision. That is the zoom technology. Okay. So activating the zoom, usually the zoom is used with the color that are inverted, since it is simpler to read white on black than black on white, and using 3 fingers, oh. You can zoom in the page, I mean in the screen, and moving, as you can see, in the interface. And they use this solution with tablets and iPad Pro for reading. So they zoom in the interface, and they go around. They can, here you can see, this is the home screen with the inverted colors, and I can go to books where the colors are inverted, and I can zoom inside and read. This is usually how low vision people read content. So using this screen magnifier and inverting the colors. So in your solution, when you develop the user interface, you have to keep in mind how they work, how they interact with your interface, so to develop in the right way the content and the interface. But yeah. Okay. I think we have quite done. So one thing that I want to show you is that we have published a white paper on the accessibility, and it is free until the 15th of June. So if you want to download it from our website, Fondazione Lia, or using this QR code, you can download the white paper where we explain the different requirements of the laws on accessibility, and we have also the different links to all the guidelines and the documents on how to create fully accessible content and fully accessible user interfaces. So thank you for being here. And okay, have a nice afternoon. Thanks.